Chapter 102. Hearing that, Yin Shishuan was full of guilt and said, "Workshop owner Su, you are exaggerating. In fact, it's all my fault. If I didn't let the Jin family mess around, there would be no such thing today. Fortunately, I saw the scene that Jin Cheng, Ao attacked you with my own eyes. No matter how many reasons Jin Zhentian finds, his son can't get away with it. This time, I must act impartially and give justice to workshop owner." Su Li showed a gratified smile and nodded gently. "I didn't expect that child Jin would suddenly kill me. This time, I almost passed by the gate of hell. It really makes Su Li feel scared. Since I'm fine, I won't bother you anymore. Satrap, please send me back to the school. Mammy is still waiting for me." "Okay," Yin Shishuan promised. "You have a personal mammy to take care of you. You will definitely recover faster than in my house. I'll send someone to send you back." After some arrangements, Satrap Yin watched the carriage leave and couldn't help but sigh. Workshop owner Su was about the same age as his daughter, but she was experienced in dealing with people. She didn't look like a naive girl at all. Besides, Hongxiu said that her embroidery skills were also top-notch. It was the first time for him to see such a genius. The world is so vast and full of strange things. Yin Shishuan sighed and turned back to the house. He continued to worry about the Jin family. Su Li returned to the courtyard of the school. Mammy Li looked at Su Li's pale face and shed tears. After helping Su Li lie down, she immediately went out to buy chicken, duck, and fish. She was going to make soup for Su Li to nourish her body. When Ruamin, Feng Qingru, and others received the news, but they didn't come to see Su Li at the first time. Instead, they chose to send tonics to let Su Li have a good rest for a period of time. It was not too late to bother Su Li when she was almost well. "I didn't expect that such a thing happened." Fortunately, Su Li was lucky and was not killed by Jin Cheng Ao. When Ruamin calmed down and said to Gong Xiangjuan, who was lying in a coma on the bed, Gong Xiangjuan moved her eyes. It seemed that she wanted to open them, but she couldn't. Gong Min smiled bitterly and said, "Grandma One, don't work in vain. Grandma can hear you, but she can't open her eyes or speak. Many doctors in the city have come to take a look, but none of them can explain what happened." When Ruamin sighed deeply, "This kind of strange disease is really rare. Fortunately, your grandma can still bear it. I will find another famous doctor." Unfortunately, the legendary great Dr. Qi has been missing for many years. Some people even say that he has passed away. If you can ask him for help, your grandmother will definitely be cured. Gong Min immediately felt helpless. How could she meet that kind of genius doctor just because she wanted to? Even if she met him, he might not necessarily help her. The temperament of genius doctors was very strange. After Su Li returned to the courtyard, she didn't need to hide anymore. She immediately ran the Ghost Valley meditation direction to heal herself. The Ghost Valley meditation direction deserved to be the holy book of medicine. In less than 2 days, she felt that the wounds in her body were almost healed, leaving only superficial wounds. Of course, this was also related to her innate physique. If she was still in the acquired realm, she would need at least half a month to recuperate. After the injury was almost healed, Su Li returned to the Linli building and was immediately surrounded by Feng Yuan and others. "How are your injuries?" Feng Yuan stared at Su Li's pale face and couldn't help but care about her. "It's no big deal." Su Li didn't seem to see the concern in Feng Yuan's eyes and replied lightly. Then she immediately asked about the situation of the Linli building these days. "According to your instructions, I have divided the osmanthus wine into 3 grades." When Yin Shuedong talked about the specific matters, she was full of confidence. She said, "The first grade osmanthus wine is the raw liquor with extremely high degree. Those who are weak will be drunk after 1 cup. This kind of wine is sold as a gimmick. I price a pot of 100,000 taels. The second grade osmanthus wine is the liquor after being diluted 100 times. The price is 1,000 taels. The third grade osmanthus wine is the one we sold before. The original price remains the same. Miss Su Li, what do you think?" Su Li nodded gently and thought for a moment. She said, "Well done. How much profit has the winery made during this period?" 245,000 taels. Yin Shuedong immediately replied, "This is the pure profit. We have earned back all the cost of building the winery. Chu Qingning, Haydn, and others couldn't help but be speechless. It was too horrible to recover the cost in 1 month. Very good. Next, we should prepare for the expansion. Su Li glanced at the people present and said roughly. Then she pointed to Fang Yuan and said, Fang Yuan, you stay here. Others can leave. Chu Qingning smiled and secretly gave Fang Yuan a thumbs up. He took everyone out of the addendum. Fang Yuan was also nervous. When everyone left, he couldn't help but ask, What do you want me to do here? What do you think? Su Li smiled gently. Fang Yuan blushed and was slightly annoyed. He said, Don't make fun of me. Okay. Su Li shrugged indifferently and said, The thing about Jincheng Ao is not finished yet. You go to Yinzai today. So, Fang Yuan's expression changed slightly. He didn't understand why Su Li was so persistent about the Jin family. Do you have to kill them all? Holding the secret letter in his hand, Fang Yuan looked up at the dim night. He thought of the lust in Jincheng Ao's eyes that day. Finally, he did not hesitate to disappear into the night. In the dungeon of the provincial office, begging for mercy and roaring were heard day after day. In the past 2 days, the roaring was much louder than usual. Let me out. Why do you catch me? I said that I didn't kill Su Li at all. The sword hit it by itself. The burning anger in Jincheng Ao's eyes had already made him lose his mind. As arrogant as he was, how could he bear the word prisoner? It was inconsistent with his identity and his state of mind. The jailer impatiently scratched his ear and couldn't help but say, First, Master Jin, you'd better stop for a while. If you want to prove your innocence, you should think of a decent reason. The sword hit it by itself? Do you think everyone is a fool? It's really ridiculous. What I said is true. Jincheng Ao roared madly. Why don't you believe me? Ha 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 ha. After he said that, the jailer sneered, which made Jincheng Ao angrier. He didn't understand why he was so angry, but he was angry. Once this kind of anger was generated, it couldn't be stopped. He couldn't calm down and think about the problem at all. He had already understood that he must have been tricked, but what scared him was that he couldn't control his emotions at all. At this time, the sound of the prison chain came into his ears. Jincheng Ao sensitively raised his head and revealed a pair of scarlet eyes. Yin Zai, who came in, was shocked as if he was stared at by a beast. However, it didn't prevent him from completing the order of Mr. Li. Yin Zai showed a sarcastic smile and said, Jincheng Ao, I didn't expect that you would be so arrogant. Aren't you proud? Today you are a prisoner. Let's see how you can be arrogant. Yin. Zi. Yi. Jincheng Ao's face was distorted like a devil in hell. He was full of hatred. He struggled hard and the chains on his limbs suddenly rattled. He said, If you dare to say one more word, I will kill you. I'm really scared. Yin Zai looked indifferent and sat in front of Jincheng Ao. He said, I'm sitting here. Come and kill me. You are cruel and worse than pigs and dogs. It's not enough to hurt workshop owner Su. Do you want to kill me in the provincial office? Yin Zai sneered and felt very happy. Mr. Li's order was to let him come to the dungeon to humiliate Jincheng Ao. He wanted to do this kind of thing. In the martial arts competition last year, Jincheng Ao not only defeated him, but also humiliated him in front of everyone and broke one of his legs. If his father didn't spend a lot of money to buy the magical plaster from Yunjing, he would have been a useless person now. How could such hatred disappear just like that? Ah! Jincheng Ao struggled crazily. A layer of stone powder fell from the wall, but he still couldn't break free. Yin Zai, I will kill you. I will kill all of you. Yin Shishuan, Su Li, wait and see. Yin Zai was horrified. Was Jincheng Ao crazy? Why did he look abnormal? However, when he saw Jincheng Ao being so embarrassed, he felt more comfortable. He even felt that there was a sign of progress in his cultivation. Jincheng Ao, why are you still struggling? You intend to kill the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop in the provincial city. It's a big crime. Even your father can't save you. As long as my father reports to Yunjing, you will be executed immediately. There is no other end. Yin Zai's cruel words were like the tip of a knife stabbing into Jincheng Ao's heart. It made Jincheng Ao tremble all over. Then, a breath like a storm drowned Yin's eye. What is this? Jin Chung Ao. Yin's eye was terrified. In his eyes, the walls suddenly cracked like a spider web, and then, boom! The whole dungeon seemed to have an earthquake. Large pieces of the wall that locked the chain fell. Yin's eye was hit carelessly and fainted directly. The dungeon was in chaos in an instant. Jin Chung Ao saw the consequences caused by his bursting power. His eyes suddenly became clear. The effect of Su Li's medicine had passed. I broke through the peak of the acquired realm. Jin Chung Ao was ecstatic. Immediately, he saw Yin's eye, who was pressed under the stone and kept vomiting blood. His pupils shrank immediately. In addition to Yin's eye's life, he would definitely be executed by Yin Shishuan immediately. No, I want to escape. When I reach the inborn realm and come back, even Yin Shishuan can't control me. Thinking of this, Jin Chung Ao jumped out of the stone wall. He wore a prisoner's uniform and quickly blended into the night. He fled to the wilderness. Feeling the harsh wind in his ears, Jin Chung Ao was full of excitement. This is the peak of the acquired realm. When my Ao sword skills are further improved, I can tie with the general warriors of the inborn realm without breaking through the inborn realm. Qinghe Province, Yin Shishuan. It won't take long for me to get back at you. Suddenly, a ray of light seemed to shoot from the sky. Before Jin Chung Ao could react, it penetrated his chest and blasted a fist-sized hole in his chest. Jin Chung Ao staggered and fell into the dust. He lost his heart and instantly died. His eyes were wide open. There was a little disbelief in his eyes. It seemed that he didn't expect that he would die in such an unknown way. Under the moonlight, Su Li with a pale face walked over with a long bow in her hand. She muttered to the corpse. In the previous life, you did carry forward the Ao sword skills and became a senior at the peak of the inborn realm. You forced the daughter of the Yin family to marry. Yin Hongxiu was tortured to death by you. However, you were too arrogant. You offended too many people in the martial arts circle. Soon, you got into trouble. You died at the age of 30. However, your Ao sword skills soon had a successor. This successor was not someone else. He was the beggar who found the secret when he collected your corpse. Therefore, your name was left in the biography of the martial arts circle. Although you only lived for 30 years, you became a shining legend in the martial arts circle. In this life, Su Li said and gently put the bow next to the corpse. She split the soul of Jin Chung Ao's shoe with a sword. I will accept your Ao sword skills. A thin piece of paper fell from the inside of the soul to the ground. Chapter 103. When Su Li returned to the Linli building, the news that Jin Chung Ao fled for fear of punishment had spread all over the city. It not only made the Yin family angry, but also caught the Jin family off guard. They never expected that Jin Chung Ao would despise the laws of the Dahan country and escape from the prison. Moreover, he seriously injured the third child of the Yin family. It was said that the third child was dying. Such a change made Jin Jintian realize that the Jin family and the Yin family had completely gone to the opposite side, and there was no room for turning back. Chung Ao's martial arts talent is very strong. It doesn't matter if he escapes. Jin Jintian looked up at the sky and sighed. He was not sure to deal with the attack of the Yin family. Although he was shocked and surprised that Jin Chung Ao could escape from the prison, he was more happy and gratified. He knew that his son hid a secret from him, and it must be related to the martial arts circle. Jin Chung Ao could break the prison of the satrap's mansion with bare hands, which meant that he had reached the peak of the acquired realm. As long as he could go further, no matter which country he goes to, the inborn senior will be respected. At that time, my son's mistake will be reduced to a small one. No one can do anything about it. The more Jin Jintian thought, the more excited he was. But he didn't know that Jin Chung Ao had become a pool of blood because of Su Li. At the same time, the satrap's mansion was filled with a faint anxiety. Yin Shishuan stood outside the door with a gloomy face. He watched the maids bring out basins of blood from the room, but he didn't see the doctor come out. Madame Yin and Yin Hongxiu stood aside with red eyes. This bastard. Why did he provoke Jin Chung Ao? His life is in danger. Yin Shishuan couldn't help but scold. Mrs. Yin wiped her tears and said sadly, Lord, at this time, why do you blame the third brother? God bless my son. He must be fine. Jean, Chung, Ao. Yin Hongxiu's eyes were burning with hatred. She said, if I knew that he would hurt the third brother, I should have killed him directly. After 2 consecutive shocks, Yin Hongxiu's resentment towards Jean Chung, Ao had reached the extreme. If Jean Chung, Ao hadn't disappeared, she would have rushed into the dungeon with a knife without saying a word. When the 3 of them were waiting anxiously, the sweating doctor finally came out of the room. Yin Shishuan and the other 2 immediately greeted him. Dr. Lin, how's my son? Dr. Lin looked at the 3 people's eager eyes, but he couldn't help sighing. Your young master is not as lucky as workshop owner Su. His ribs were broken by the big stone, and one of them happened to pierce into his lungs. I'm afraid. What? Yin Shishuan and the other 2 felt as if they had been struck by lightning, and their faces instantly turned pale. Zai. Lady Yin let out a sorrowful cry. Her eyes rolled back and she fainted. The maidservants were in a flurry. Dr. Lin quickly went forward and pinched her philtrum. Not long after, Lady Yin regained consciousness, but her face was full of tears and she could no longer speak. Lord Yin, there's nothing I can do. It's better to prepare for the young master as soon as possible. Dr. Lin sighed, as if he was too ashamed to stay here any longer. He picked up the medicine box and left in a hurry. Walking into the room, Yin Shishuan stood in front of the window and looked at Yin Zai, who was lying on the bed like a piece of golden paper. Yin Shishuan pursed his lips and felt his hands and feet go cold. In his life, he had experienced all kinds of despair, but none had been as heart-wrenching and bone-chilling as this one. It happened so suddenly that it was too late for Qing and I and others to come back to see Zai for the last time. Is there really no other way? Yin Shishuan clenched his fists and made a cracking sound. Tap, tap, tap. Yin Hongxiu walked in step by step. She leaned against the bed and stared at Yin Zai blankly. Tears flowed out of her red and swollen eyes. She carefully held Yin Zai's cold hands and whispered with trembling lips, Third brother, don't you like Hongxiu the most? Open your eyes quickly and look at me. Thanks to you, my archery has improved a lot recently. Suddenly, Yin Hongxiu seemed to think of something. She was slightly startled and immediately let go of Zai's hands. She turned around and grabbed Yin Shishuan's sleeves. Father, I have a way. Go and find the immortal master. She must have a way to save the third brother. Father, go with me to find the immortal master. Yin Shishuan was shocked by Yin Hongxiu's sudden madness. After hearing his daughter's words, he looked more confused. Immortal master? Who was that? Was it possible that Hongxiu became his disciple? That was too reckless. Why didn't she mention it to him? Father, don't hesitate anymore. Seeing that her father didn't move, Yin Hongxiu suddenly broke down and said, The immortal master also knows the third brother. She is such a powerful person. She will definitely help him. Yin Shishuan was awakened by Yin Hongxiu. He immediately held her hands and said, Okay, there's no time to lose. Lead the way to that otherworldly expert immediately. He could already imagine that the so-called master of Yin Hongxiu must be an immortal senior. Such a person might really have a way. No, no, no. She is in the Linli building. She is the boss of the Linli building. Yin Hongxiu was so anxious that she burst into tears and said, The immortal master said that I can't tell others about the relationship. I have violated the agreement and can't take more people there. Father, let me go with you to find her. The boss of the Linli building? Yin Shishuan was even more surprised. If he remembered correctly, the boss of the Linli building was a young woman. Although she never showed up, he knew that the woman was definitely younger than him from her figure. Could she help to cure Zai's injury? Yin Shishuan was deeply doubtful, but there was no other way. He didn't hesitate too much and immediately took Yin Hongxiu to go to the Linli building for help. But before they went out of the yard, a servant came to report, Master. The boss of the Linli building came to visit. She said that she had something important to discuss with you. She actually came by herself? Yin Shishuan's hurried expression was slightly stagnant. He immediately said, Invite her in. The immortal master is coming. Yin Hongxiu turned from sadness to joy. Since she saw Su Li's magical means, she had a blind confidence in Su Li. After a short while, Su Li dressed as Ms. Li came to the yard. When she saw Yin Shixuan, she bowed slightly and said quickly, "Satrap Yin, I take the liberty to visit you. Please forgive me. I heard that the third master of the Linli building was seriously injured and the doctors were helpless. I have a relationship with the third master of the Linli building. Can I have a try?" Su Li directly told the purpose of her visit. Yin Shixuan was immediately happy and said quickly, "Come on, Ms. Li, please come in. My son is in danger. I won't be polite. If my son can survive, I will repay you." Su Li was a little surprised. She looked at Yin Hongxiu, who was avoiding her eyes. She immediately understood that the relationship between her and the brother and sister of the Yin family had been exposed. She didn't say anything and stepped into the room. Yin Shixuan immediately followed her. Seeing Yin Zai lying on the bed, Su Li sighed in her heart. She just let Yin Zai stimulate the last power of the medicine in Jin Cheng, Ao's body, and let him break the chain and escape. But she didn't expect that Jin Cheng, Ao directly broke through to the peak of the acquired realm. Yin Zai almost died because of her. Although she was reborn and her medical circle and poison circle had reached the sublime realm, she was not a god. Naturally, she couldn't calculate all the possibilities in the world. Fortunately, Yin Zai's injury was not serious in her eyes. This mistake could be corrected. "Ms. Li, how is my son? Can he be saved?" Seeing that Su Li didn't speak for a long time, Yin Shixuan couldn't help but ask. Su Li came to her sense and nodded slightly. She said softly, "Lord Yin, please be at ease. Your son broke 3 ribs and hurt his lungs. It is impossible for ordinary people. Fortunately, your son has practiced a little Xiangong and can hold on. I know a little about medical circle. This injury can be cured." "That's good." Yin Shixuan breathed a long sigh of relief. Then he immediately realized something and exclaimed, "Xiangong? Zai has practiced Xiangong. I didn't. If it is convenient for Lord Yin, please leave. I am going to perform acupuncture. I can't be disturbed by others." Su Li interrupted Yin Shixuan faintly. Yin Shixuan woke up and apologized. He left the room without saying anything. He was afraid that his son would be disturbed by Su Li. Back to the door, Yin Shixuan still frowned. No matter how he thought, he couldn't understand how his son secretly learned his Xiangong. He didn't leave any book record and didn't pass it on to anyone. That Xiangong was a secret that couldn't be mentioned to anyone. Ms. Li also knows Xiangong. Could it be? Various speculations appeared in Yin Shixuan's mind. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of Yin Hongxiu, who was leaning on the window and peeping. He immediately covered Yin Hongxiu's mouth and carried her down from the window. After walking far away, he asked, "Shtou, do you know anything about the background of your master?" Yin Hongxiu was relieved when her father put her down. She rolled her eyes and said, "Dad, you really scared me. I don't know the background of the immortal master. Besides, she only promised to teach me archery. She didn't let me worship her as a master." "It's good that you didn't worship her as a master." Yin Shixuan breathed a sigh of relief. There were many rules in the martial arts circle. A teacher for a day was a father for a lifetime. If Hongxiu really worshipped her as a master, the relationship between the Yin family and Ms. Li would be too close. However, I heard from the third brother that the immortal master is a great senior. Yin Hongxiu proudly counted her fingers and said, "I remember that she is called Inborn Senior. Although I don't know what it means, the immortal master is really powerful. She can shoot through the target at once." "Well, she's really powerful." Yin Shixuan was still absent-minded. He gradually recalled the whole sentence of Yin Hongxiu. His heart couldn't stop beating. He couldn't help but grab Yin Hongxiu's shoulder. He stared at her and confirmed again, "Xiu, what did you say? Inborn Senior? Are you sure you didn't hear it wrong?" "Dad, you hurt me." Yin Hongxiu struggled for a while and said angrily, "I am not deaf. The third brother repeated it to me many times. How could I hear it wrong?" Yin Shixuan was stunned. He thought that he was just a few feet away from Su Li. What they said before might have been heard by her. His face immediately darkened. This bastard has grown up. He not only learned Xingong secretly, but also got acquainted with an inborn senior quietly. He didn't tell me about these things. When he recovers, I will beat him to the point that he can't get down. How dare he? Chapter 104. Squeak. The door was gently pushed open. Suli poked her head out, but she didn't see Yin Shixuan and Yin Hongxiu. She couldn't help but feel strange. She was concentrating on treating Yin Zai just now. How could she have time to listen to Yin Shixuan's words? This, miss? At this time, Mrs. Yin hurried in. She couldn't help but be stunned when she saw Suli. Then she quickly quickened her pace and walked to Suli. She asked eagerly, "How is Zai? Can I go in and have a look?" She was told by the maids that a young doctor volunteered to treat Yin Zai. She immediately ignored the advice of the maids. She directly got up from the bed and ran to Yin Zai despite her dizziness. Her heart sank when she saw Suli. Although Suli wore a veil, she could see at a glance that Suli was not old. How could such a young girl have such high medical skills? Suli looked at Mrs. Yin with a gentle smile on her face. She said, "Your child is fine. It is estimated that he will wake up in a few hours. Please go in and sit down and wait." Okay. Mrs. Yin didn't believe Suli's words at all. She answered perfunctorily and walked in with red eyes. Suli was not angry. She tidied up her clothes and left the Yin mansion with the medicine box without disturbing anyone. Mrs. Yin walked into the room and was surprised to see Yin Zai on the bed. She clearly remembered that Zai's face was as white as a piece of paper before, but now it was very ruddy. It seemed that Zai was not in a coma but sleeping. Could it be that the lady just now really has some ability? Mrs. Yin's eyes were faintly shaken. At this time, Yin Zai snorted. Mrs. Yin immediately looked up and saw that Yin Zai's eyelashes trembled and he opened his eyes. "Yi, you wake up." Mrs. Yin was overjoyed. She immediately ran out to inform Yin Shixuan, "Master, Zai woke up." He woke up. Yin Zai looked at the top of the bed. His eyes were blank. "Where am I?" "Yes, I stimulated Jin Cheng, AO in the dungeon." Unexpectedly, his Xingong broke through and collapsed the dungeon. "I am still alive?" Yin Zai raised his hand and found that it was not as weak as he imagined, but his chest was still aching. "My injuries?" Yin Zai touched his chest with a look of surprise. The moment he was hit, he knew that he was done for. He would either die or be seriously injured and become a cripple, but the pain in his body told him that his injury was not serious. He would probably be full of vigor after recuperating for half a month. "Zai." Yin Shixuan's voice came from the door. The back door was opened. Yin Hongxiu and Mrs. Yin also arrived. "Father." Yin Zai looked ashamed and said, "I was wrong. I didn't expect that Jin Cheng, AO almost broke through the peak of the acquired realm. I just scolded him a little." "You." Yin Shixuan was so angry that he didn't know what to say. This brat had just crawled back from the gates of hell. Could it be that he could give him a heavier punishment? Forget it. Forget it. I'll let this matter go. If Mr. Li didn't come in time, you would have been dead already. Yin Shixuan snorted coldly, flicked his sleeves, and left. Lady Yin, on the other hand, was beaming with joy. The old master really had a sharp tongue but a soft heart. He was already so anxious earlier, but now he was still pretending to be calm. Did Mr. Li come? Yin Zai was stunned and immediately smiled bitterly. He said, "No wonder. I knew that my injury was not so light." The immortal master came by himself. Yin Hongxiu said with a smile, "It seems that the third brother has a high position in Mr. Li's mind. I just begged you to find the immortal master. I didn't expect that the immortal master had already arrived. Fortunately, the girl was a miraculous doctor and saved your life. You should thank her," Lady Yin said with a serious face. "Do you know that when Dr. Lin asked us to prepare for your funeral, my heart was almost broken? Don't mess around in the future. Your life is the most important." Facing his mother's warning, Yin Zai felt guilty and scared. He said, "Mother, don't worry. I will do what I can in the future. Tell me in detail. How did you know Mr. Li?" Yin Shixuan saw that his son was in good spirits and couldn't help asking. "It was in the prisoner camp." Yinzai remembered the scene on that day and immediately said. After Suli returned to the Linli building, her days returned to peace. After the incident of Jincheng Ao, the contradiction between the Yin family and the Jin family was public. The Jin family didn't dare to be as arrogant as before. Everything was as usual in the Linli building and the embroidery workshop. No one deliberately made trouble. Suli didn't need to take care of the courses in the school because of her injury. Therefore, Suli stayed in the Linli building these days and asked Feng Yuan to find a craftsman to build a set of distillation equipment mentioned by her husband in the previous life. Suli, what are you building this thing for? It looks weird. Chu Qingning ran over and looked at the huge thing in the underground addendum. Two barrel-shaped things were connected by long pipes. He didn't know what they were used for. Of course, it is used to make wine. Suli smiled slightly and answered simply without explaining. This? Chu Qingning was confused and asked, It can make wine? You will know when the new wine comes out. I will teach you how to use it. Suli checked the equipment and confirmed that it was well sealed. Then she turned around and began to prepare the rice wine. Sisterly, isn't this ordinary rice wine? I think it can be sold in the market. Fong Ling helped Suli and complained. If this kind of wine is sold in our store, it will lower the level of our store. Ling, don't talk nonsense. Suli must have a special way. In Shuedong glanced at Suli, who was busy and didn't speak, and reminded her in a low voice. Fong Ling stuck out her tongue and didn't speak immediately. After the rice was fermented, Suli wiped her face and said with a smile, You will know when the rice wine is brewed. Ling, you should follow my steps these days and brew more and store it in the warehouse. Remember to mark the date. Okay. Fong Ling nodded hurriedly. She always carried out Suli's orders unconditionally. Shuedong, you might as well announce the news of the new wine. I think these wines will be on the market in a few days. In Shuedong heard Suli's words and nodded slightly. Then he couldn't help but ask, What is our new wine? I'm afraid that it will not have a big impact if we just say it vaguely. Suli tilted her head and thought for a while. Then she said, Just add one word. After that, she wrote a word on the ground with a little water. Then she turned around and left without saying anything. In Shuedong looked at the word on the ground and looked more confused. Strong? What kind of wine is it? It seems that there is no strong wine in Dahan country. After dealing with the chores, Suli returned to the top floor and opened the window to look at the direction of the satrap's mansion. She was waiting for someone. With her movement technique, she could heal Yinzai's injuries without anyone noticing, and then leave quietly. But she chose to go above board. In this way, the news that Ms. Li was a medical master would be spread to Wenruamin soon. Gong Xiangjuan hadn't heard from her for half a month. She didn't believe that Wenruamin wouldn't come to her after the news that Yinzai was seriously injured was spread. This time, I just want to return Feng Qingru's favor. If not, I don't need to be so troublesome. Suli sighed in her heart and showed a complex expression. But the favor was the most difficult to return. She wanted Feng Qingru to be the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop according to the track of her previous life and let her live without regret. If he could do that, then he would be able to repay her favor. Suli thought in her heart. But in the next 7 days, she waited for a long time and didn't see anyone visit the Linli building, which made her feel uneasy. Did something happen to Gong Xiangjuan? Or Gong Xiangjuan was dead? Suli's eyes were slightly gloomy, and she turned to go downstairs. Less than an hour later, she had restored her original identity and appeared in the courtyard of the school. Go to see Dean Gong. I haven't heard from her for a long time. I'm worried. When Suli walked out of the door, Xiaowu and Datian, who had been worried for many days, were happy. They immediately hesitated and said, Lord, your injury. It doesn't matter. Suli smiled and shook her head. She said, I have been recuperating for many days. Although I can't take the carriage for a long time, it is not a problem for me to travel such a short distance. Since you said so, Lord. Xiaowu gritted his teeth and led a carefully modified carriage. The carriage was covered with layers of flannels, which greatly reduced the vibration. This is a little gift from Datian and me, hee. Xiaowu scratched his head and blushed. He smiled embarrassedly. Suli was stunned and immediately showed a gentle smile. She said, Thank you. Let's go. Okay. Xiaowu and Datian immediately jumped on the carriage and gently whipped the horse's buttocks. The carriage immediately drove into the forest. Noticing that Xiaowu deliberately slowed down the speed, Suli was more silent. A strange feeling rose from the bottom of her heart. In the previous life, she was used to deception. No matter who she faced, she was always very vigilant. She was afraid that she had no luck to enjoy the simple enthusiasm of Xiaowu and Datian. Xiaowu, which village did you say you came from? When Xiaowu heard Suli's question, he immediately laughed and said, Lord, Datian and I are both from a small fishing village by the river outside the Qinghe town. It is very remote, and the villagers are not rich. Both of us are orphans who grew up there. We can't read a few words. Sorry to make you laugh at us. When Suli heard that, she slightly pursed her mouth and immediately said, I'm quite curious after hearing what you said. If you are free, why don't you take me to your village to have a look? Xiaowu was overjoyed when he heard that. That's great. If we can go back with you, we can return to our hometown in glory. Speaking of which, we haven't seen the village head for many years. Speaking of this, Xiaowu suddenly felt that it was inappropriate. He hesitated and said, Lord, I'm afraid not. I'm afraid that it's not safe for you to go there with your appearance. Don't worry. I'll take guards with me. Suli dispelled Xiaowu's doubts. Datian grinned from ear to ear. It was great to take the opportunity to go back and have a look. With the protection of guards, they didn't have to worry about being robbed by thieves. Suli sat in the carriage, and her eyes were gloomy. The idea of going to Xiaowu's hometown to have a look just emerged in her mind. If these two people were willing, it would be better to give them a good fortune. However, everything had not been decided yet. She had to go to the small fishing village to make a decision. Lord, we have arrived at the courtyard of Dingong. Xiaowu's voice came. Suli walked out of the carriage and approached the courtyard. She immediately frowned. In addition to the Numas of Gong Min, Gong Xiangjuan, Wen Ruomin, and Feng Qingru, there were others. When the maids at the door saw Suli coming, they immediately saluted. They knew the relationship between Suli and Gong Xiangjuan, so they immediately took Suli into the courtyard without informing her. After Suli followed them across a courtyard gate, the vague voice in the courtyard suddenly became clear. Chapter 105. Inside the room, it was still the same as last time. However, Gong Xiangjuan was not in front of the desk, but lying on the bed. Feng Qingru and Gong Min sat on one side respectively, when Ruomin sat on the armchair beside the bed. The three of them glared at the plump woman standing in the room. Second mother, it was you who made Grandma go away. Now you want her to go back with illness. Gong Min was not as gentle as before. Her eyes were full of resentment and hatred. She said, I want to ask you, what is your intention? The plump woman was Wu Yun, the second madam of the Gong family. When Ruomin sat aside and breathed quickly, she was not a member of the Gong family, so it was not appropriate for her to intervene in this matter. But if Wu Yun really wanted to take away Gong Min and Gong Xiangjuan forcibly, she would never sit idly by. Wu Yun seemed to be touched by Gong Min. She looked slightly annoyed, but she returned to normal in an instant. She even said with a little apology, Min, you also know that I was young and aggressive at that time. It was all the consequences of impulsiveness. Now I know that I was wrong. Can't you forgive me? Gong Min's eyes were very cold, as if she did not see the apology on Wu Yun's face. She said, some things are wrong. If you admit your mistake now, can you save my mother's life? Wu Yun's tail seemed to be stepped on by a cat. She was angry and screamed, Gong Min, I didn't kill your mother. How many times do you want me to say that before you believe it? I will never believe it. Gong Min leaned over the bed and said resolutely and crisply, go away. As long as you are still in that home, Grandma and I will never go back. Wu Yun stopped breathing. The hypocritical expression on her face was like a piece of paper being torn. Her expression was slightly distorted. When Ruomin saw that the situation was not good, she immediately stood up and shouted coldly, Wu Yun, this is not the Wu Mansion or the Gong Mansion. What do you want to do? Believe it or not, I will call someone to drive you out. Wu Yun stopped and her chest trembled with anger. She said, good, good. Good. Very good, Gongmin. You are very good. Let's forget about today. Since I have come to Qinghe Town, don't think that I will give up so easily. Let's wait and see. Wu Yun glared at Gong Xiangjuan on the bed and immediately left. She glanced at Su Li in front of the door and snorted coldly. She warned, if anyone comes to see the old lady of the Gong family after today, don't blame me for being merciless. Su Li smiled gently and walked in without looking at Wu Yun. Wu Yunfeng's eyes widened in anger, and her face turned pale. She didn't mind the Gong family. But how could a little student of the Qinghe girls' school despise her? How preposterous. All of you, just you wait. Wu Yun roared madly and left the courtyard with her people. The remaining 3 people all smiled and felt that this scene was really refreshing. Su Li, why are you here? How are your injuries? Gong Min forced a smile as she wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes. Su Li shook her head and smiled warmly. It's no big deal. I heard that Ding Gong also fell ill. I feel better these days, so I come to see her. By the way, just now, when Ruamin sighed and shook her head, little girl Su, you shouldn't get involved in this. That woman is not easy to deal with, but she married into the Gong family in Yunjing. Now the backyard of the Gong family belongs to her. Even Ding Gong was driven out by her. The Gong family in Yunjing? Su Li said in surprise. She was really surprised. In the previous life, she had no contact with Gong Xiangjuan. How could she know her specific origin? Yes, the Gong family is a big family in Yunjing. When Ruamin explained in detail, the big families in Yunjing are inextricably linked with the imperial court. You can't offend them. You have offended Wu Yun just now. She will definitely hold a grudge and make trouble for you in the future. Even the Qinghe girls' school can't help you. When Ruamin said helplessly, Gong Min and Feng Qingru were even more depressed. Seeing this, Su Li immediately comforted her. Dean 1, you don't have to think so far. I turned misfortune into blessing this time. My luck is not bad. Don't worry about me. The most urgent thing is the illness of Ding Gong. I heard from the mammy that the 3rd son of the satrap was almost killed by Jin Cheng Ao, but he was saved later. Why don't we try our luck? That's what I want to do. When Ruamin's eyes brightened when she heard Su Li's words, she said, although the satrap doesn't seem to want to say more for fear of offending that person. I learned from the servants in their mansion that the mysterious boss of the Linli building cured the 3rd son of the Yin family. I intend to send someone to invite him, but I have been harassed by Wu Yun all day these days. I can't get away. I see. Su Li suddenly understood and then suggested, if you don't mind, Dean 1, why don't you write a letter? I happen to go back to the courtyard on the way. Let Xiaowu take the letter to avoid being noticed by Wu Yun. That's great. When Ruamin immediately got up and walked to the desk, she wrote a letter quickly and gave it to Su Li. She said, thank you. You should be careful. Okay. Without much delay, Su Li went back to the Linli building on the grounds that she was not feeling well. She handed the letter to Xiaowu. Xiaowu naturally went to the Linli building without stopping. Su Li arranged a contingency in the Linli building. Xiaowu quickly got the reply and rushed back to Gong Xiangjuan's courtyard. When Ruamin saw that Xiaowu was so efficient and praised him in her heart, she immediately opened the reply letter. Thank you for your kindness. I will visit you tonight and treat the Ding Gong. When Ruamin was overjoyed after reading the short sentence, she said, he agreed. Mr. Li is really merciful. He agreed immediately. Gong Min stayed at the bedside and couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. It was rumored that Mr. Li was mysterious and had superb medical skills. Even if he couldn't completely cure her grandma, he could tell what disease her grandma had. Su Li returned to the Linli building from the courtyard and took the medicine box hidden in the underground addendum. Then she dressed up as Mr. Li and came to the gate of the school. It was getting dark. There were already people waiting at the gate of the school. Seeing Su Li's iconic white dress, 2 people immediately greeted her and said respectfully, Are you Mr. Li? Su Li nodded slightly. The 2 people were overjoyed and immediately let Su Li get on the carriage. Then they drove all the way to Gong Xiangjuan's courtyard. There was no accident on the way. Su Li returned to Gong Xiangjuan's courtyard. Her pneuma and expression had changed, so people who were familiar with her couldn't see any clue. Mr. Li, you finally come. When Ruamin stood in front of the door and saw that Mr. Li was a young woman, she was slightly surprised, but she quickly reacted and came out to greet Mr. Li calmly. Su Li smiled gently and said in a strange tone, Dean 1, you don't have to be so polite. It's not too late. I will go in and treat Dean Gong. Seeing that Su Li was so straightforward, when Ruamin was also relieved. She had no time to doubt Su Li's medical skills. Then she stepped aside to let Su Li go in. Hello, Mr. Li. When Gong Min saw Su Li in white with a veil on her face come in, she was stunned. But she reacted quickly and immediately gave way to Su Li so that Su Li could feel Gong Xiangjuan's pulse. At this time, it was meaningless to doubt Su Li. It was better to let Su Li diagnose and see the result. Su Li felt Gong Xiangjuan's pulse and immediately frowned. Her inference was right. In the previous life, Gong Xiangjuan was poisoned to death. But in this life, she was affected by Su Li and showed symptoms in advance. Su Li thought and slowly let go of her hand to feel the pulse. Gong Min, who was worried, waited for a moment and finally couldn't help asking, Mr. Li, what disease does my grandma have? Do you have? Miss Gong, calm down. Let me ask you a few questions. Su Li raised her hand to stop Gong Min from asking more questions. She asked, who is responsible for Dean Gong's daily food and drink? Gong Min's face turned pale and she said, Mr. Li, you mean? Yes. Su Li nodded slightly and said, Dean Gong is not sick, but poisoned. As soon as Su Li said that, the three people present all turned pale with horror. Even Gong Xiangjuan's eyes moved violently. Dean Gong didn't offend anyone. How could she be poisoned? When Ruamin suddenly thought of something and her face immediately became gloomy. It seems that Dean 1 has gained something. Chapter 106. The long sword drew a beautiful arc and flashed several times in Gong Min's eyes with great precision. The tip of the sword seemed to have eyes and actually touched the tips of all the darts. A series of crisp sounds mixed together, and then the darts fell to the ground weakly with tinkling sounds. Damn it! When the man in black saw this scene, he suddenly showed a look as if he had seen a ghost. He was so scared that he ran away without saying anything. But before he took a few steps, a white light flashed in front of him, and Su Li's figure appeared in front of him like a ghost. Su Li snorted coldly. Before the man in black could react, she chopped his neck with one hand. The man suddenly groaned and fell to the ground. A bloody smell suddenly spread. Su Li couldn't help frowning and squatting down to check. The black cloth on the face of the man in black was overflowing with blood. Mist? Su Li was slightly shocked. She uncovered the black cloth and saw a strange and pale face. She pried open the man's teeth and looked carefully, but she didn't see the poison bag. Gong Min and Feng Qingru supported each other to come out. When they saw the dead body on the ground, they immediately felt weak and sat down. Dead? Ms. Li. Gong Min was frightened. Even when she was in the Gong family in Yunjing, she had never seen a dead person. When she lived in the Qinghe town with her grandma, she had no chance to see such ugly things. Su Li nodded slightly and said in a low voice, I was careless. This person was poisoned. I knocked him out, but hit the fatal point of the poison. He died suddenly. There must be a master of poison behind this person. Poison, it was poison again. Gong Min regained her composure. Her childish face was full of hatred. She had already guessed who was behind the killer. At this time, when Ruamin came out with a crutch, she had seen many ups and downs in her life. Her face was just a little pale. She bowed to Su Li and said, This matter frightened Ms. Li. Thanks to Ms. Li's superb martial arts, you would have been killed by the thief today. Su Li threw the bloody scarf on the face of the man in black. She stood up and clapped her hands. She said, It doesn't matter. It's a piece of cake. It's just that after this incident, the academy is no longer safe. Why don't you send Dean Gong to my place tonight? When Ruamin was scared and also shocked by Su Li's strength, there was a martial arts school in the Qinghe school. When Ruamin usually knew about it. But the strength of those martial arts lecturers was totally different from that of Ms. Li. Just thinking about that kind of speed and reflexes made her shudder. It was not something an ordinary martial artist could achieve. It seems that if I want to know more about Mr. Li, I have to go to the satrap's mansion. Thinking of this, when Ruamin slightly bowed and said, "Thank you so much for your timely help. Min, hurry up and pack up." Among them, a middle-aged woman died extremely miserably. Her face was distorted, and her limbs were broken. She had experienced extremely cruel torture before she died. That kind of torture was not commonly used even in the martial arts circle, so she was very impressed. She had always suspected that her disabled husband had a grudge against that madam, so he killed her personally. Now it seemed that it was very likely that the exiled first child came back to take revenge. The sudden death of his mother, grandmother, and Gong Min were enough to make the first child crazy. He tortured Wu Yun to death and slaughtered the whole Gong family, which became a puppet. While treating Gong Xiangjuan, Su Li returned to the school during the day and continued to study the books in the girls' school. It was useless to be an armchair strategist, but she had a lot of experience in her previous life and had been to many places. Combined with the biographies in the books, she had gained a lot. However, her reading speed was still too fast. Although she had only stayed here for a little more than 2 months, she had already read from the first floor to the top floor. There were only a few books left that she did not pay attention to. However, she had roughly memorized the words in those books. When she had nothing to do, she would pick them out and think about them. It could be said that she did not have a single moment to relax. On the 6th floor, Su Li picked up the book and was about to write it down again, but an unexpected guest came. "Ruhan? What are you?" Su Li looked Mei Ruhan up and down, and her eyes were full of surprise. Mei Ruhan wore a very simple cloth dress. If there were not a few hairpins on her head, she would almost regard her as a maid. Mei Ruhan smiled embarrassedly, but she didn't care about the eyes of others. She took Su Li's hand to a secluded place and whispered, "Li, I have been worried about you since I heard that you were seriously injured. It's a pity that I'm too busy to visit you. Now that you're here, your body should have recovered." Su Li nodded slightly. She had realized it now. "Are you here for the agreement with me?" Mei Ruhan was even more embarrassed. She said bitterly, "Li, I know it's not very kind, but I don't have a choice. Does the job you mentioned before still count?" "Of course." Su Li nodded and smiled. There seemed to be a flash of light in her eyes. Mei Ruhan didn't see it, so she was surprised and said, "That's great. Li, when will we go?" Su Li pretended to think, and then took the pen and ink. She wrote a line of words on the table and gave it to Mei Ruhan. "Take this letter to the Linli building. I believe they will take you in." Mei Ruhan was stunned. The Linli building? Did she hear it wrong? That was one of the most famous taverns in the entire Qinghe town. Just the fact that they had just released a new wine with the word strong on the signboard had caused countless people to discuss it. Even she, who didn't drink, had heard about it. Now Su Li introduced her to work there? Mei Ruhan was very surprised. She heard that the salary of the Linli building was much higher than that of ordinary taverns and inns. Although she was curious why Su Li had such a way, she had no time to think about it now. She took Su Li's letter and went to the Linli building. Su Li saw Mei Ruhan leave in a hurry. Her eyes flashed, and then she left immediately. She returned to the Linli building before Mei Ruhan arrived. Mei Ruhan was in the state of 100,000 Ys all the time, which almost drove Yin Shuodong crazy. Fortunately, Yin Shuodong soon found that Mei Ruhan was really smart. She learned some things quickly and learned quickly. Yin Shuodong gradually admitted that Su Li did find a promising person. If the Linli building opened branches in the future, there was no need to worry about the problem of the shopkeeper. Thinking of this, Yin Shuodong taught Mei Ruhan more attentively. Mei Ruhan was more and more frightened. She couldn't figure out how to learn how to be a shopkeeper when she was just a handyman. Was this what a temporary worker should learn? She didn't think about Su Li. After all, Su Li had a clean background. It was absolutely impossible for her to have a close relationship with such a force. But after thinking about Su Li, Mei Ruhan only felt strange. The Leanly building was really strange. This thought lasted until the evening. Mei Ruhan received the first salary in her life. So much. Mei Ruhan looked at the 100 taels of silver in her hand and was confused. She did nothing today. How could she have 100 taels of silver? As long as you sign this contract, 100 taels of silver is your reward. In Shuedong smiled and pushed a piece of official paper. She didn't find that she had the talent to cheat people until today. Contract? Mei Ruhan's heart trembled. There was no free lunch in the world. Did this contract ask her to sell herself to the Leanly building? It's not as serious as you think. It's just an ordinary contract. In Shuedong knew what Mei Ruhan was thinking. She couldn't help but laugh and said, "You might as well take it and have a look. It's up to you whether to sign it or not." Okay. Mei Ruhan swallowed. She picked up the thin paper and put it in front of her eyes. Then she was stunned. This was indeed an ordinary contract. Only a special provision was added. That was, during the period of working in the Leanly building, you must not disclose any secret about the Leanly building, and you must maintain absolute loyalty to the Leanly building. Otherwise, you will be held responsible by the Leanly building. Mei Ruhan looked at it again and again, but she didn't think it was a deterrent. Thinking of the current situation, she finally picked up the pen and wrote her name. Then she stamped it with her fingerprint. In Shuedong smiled more. She slowly put away the contract and said, "You can go now. Don't forget to come at night. If you don't come for one day, I will deduct it from your salary." Seeing that In Shuedong didn't put forward any excessive requirements, Mei Ruhan was finally relieved. She held the 100 taels of silver and went out of the Leanly building happily. Then she identified the direction. Instead of going back to the school to rest, she ran out of the city. Chapter 108. Following Mei Ruhan all the way, Suli stood on the dark roof along the street and watched Mei Ruhan buy a lot of food and herbs from the shops on the street. Suli raised her eyebrows and became more interested. It seemed that Mei Ruhan had other encounters in the Qinghe town, and she couldn't tell anyone about them. Otherwise, with her personality, she wouldn't have asked for help without saying a word. Mei Ruhan packed everything with difficulty and put away the remaining silver. She seemed to think of something and couldn't help showing a trace of joy on her face. After going out of the city gate, she chose some remote and difficult roads regardless of the danger at night. After walking for an hour, Suli finally saw a dilapidated temple covered in the forest. There were many beggars in the dilapidated temple. Mei Ruhan walked into the dilapidated temple with ease and distributed most of the food to them. She came to the innermost room and put down the package on her back. She gasped hard and immediately whispered, "Brother Long, are you there? Ruhan is here to see you." Brother Long. After Mei Ruhan calmly called him 3 or 4 times, a man finally crawled out from behind the dilapidated Buddha statue, accompanied by the clanking of chains. The man was unkempt and dirty, and his clothes were ragged. But it could be seen that he was a young man in his early 20s, and he was not small. There was a chain on the shoulder bones of the young man. It seemed that someone had forcibly knocked one end of the chain into the bones, so that he could not exert his strength and suffered severe pain all day long. Suli saw him through the gap of the roof and raised her eyebrows slightly. The punishment of piercing the bones was a torture that only felons who committed serious crimes would receive. The chain on his shoulder was rusty and did not bleed, which was enough to infer that he had been chained for at least 1 year. He hasn't died after 1 year, and his pneuma is quite vigorous. Another person who practices Xingong. Suli was very interested and continued to watch. When the young man saw Mei Ruhan coming, his eyes softened for a moment, but he became cold again before Mei Ruhan noticed it. "What are you doing here? Do you forget what I said last time? I told you to get out. Did you hear me?" The young man almost shouted with all his strength, and the chains on his body clanked. Mei Ruhan's body trembled, and tears of grievance welled up in her eyes. She, who had been spoiled since she was a child, had never been scolded like this. However, she did not leave. Instead, she wiped away her tears and began to take out something from the bag on her back. "This is an analgesic herb. The doctor said that it will have a miraculous effect if you crush it. These are dry rations. You must hide them well. Don't let other beggars snatch it away. I also brought you some clothes, water, and a dry cloth. Chapter 109. My name is Long. The young man in chain was about to say the pseudonym he had used for many years. But when he saw the expectation in Mei Ruhan's eyes, he couldn't help but sigh and said in a low voice, Luoyi-chin, my name is Luoyi-chin. Isn't your surname Long? Mei Ruhan was stunned and didn't respond. Su Li teased softly, little fool, that is certainly his pseudonym. Have you ever seen a fugitive dare to use his real name? He is not stupid. Mei Ruhan scratched her head embarrassedly. She didn't feel disgusted by Su Li's words, although it was the first day that she met Mr. Li. When Luoyi-chin heard the word fugitive, his eyes became cold unconsciously. He looked at Su Li with full vigilance. Although Su Li removed the chain, he still doubted whether Su Li was an enemy or a friend. Su Li glanced at Luoyi-chin and was not angry. She said lightly, since you haven't figured out the situation, I will let you have a good rest today. If you still want to resist me after you recover, don't blame me for being merciless. Mei Ruhan, watch him. I don't have so much time to watch him. Then Su Li stepped out of the guest room. She really had something to do. Gong Xiangjuan needed to be carefully observed. She couldn't make any mistakes. After she left, the atmosphere in the room suddenly relaxed. Seeing that there was no one around, Luoyi-chin finally couldn't help but ask in a low voice, Ruhan, do you know where we are? He still remembered the last time when he fainted because of the pain. The means that the horrible girl used was telekinesis, which could only be used by inborn seniors. Was it a stronghold of a sect in the martial arts circle? Did Mei Ruhan become the girl's maid for him? Mei Ruhan heard that Luoyi-chin called her so intimately. It seemed that after he was rescued by Mr. Li, his cold temperament also changed a lot. Looking at Luoyi-chin's vigilant face, she couldn't help but laugh. Brother Luo, don't be nervous. This is just a tavern in the Qinghe town. The person who rescued you is Mr. Li, the owner of the tavern, who is the miss just now. I am very good here. The shopkeeper taught me a lot of things that I can't learn in the school. Luoyi-chin was completely stunned when he heard Mei Ruhan's words. The fact was far from what he imagined. A tavern owner turned out to be an inborn master? Who would believe it? At this time, Mei Ruhan said again, Brother Luo, although Ms. Li is always unforgiving, she is actually very nice. I heard that she is not only good at martial arts, but also kind-hearted. She saved the lives of Satrap Yin and the dean of the school. Now Dean Gong is still recuperating here. Ms. Li just left in a hurry. She must have gone to take care of the dean. Hearing Mei Ruhan's words, Luoyi-chin's mouth twitched slightly. Kind? Would a kind-hearted person directly pull out the chains from his shoulders and leave 2 bloody holes, almost causing him to die of pain? In the conversation with Chu Qingning, he roughly understood the current situation of the Linli building. It turned out that it was not an ordinary winery, but a rising force that was absorbing talents and gradually growing up. He found that except for Mei Ruhan, everyone here had the trace of practicing Xiangong. Even the busy waiter downstairs had the pneuma of cultivation. Although the pneuma was as small as a firefly for him, it was already something in front of ordinary people. If I recover fully, my cultivation will go to a higher level after years of accumulation. But I don't know where I can rank among the 3 of them. As for Mr. Li, Luoyi-chin drank the medicine brought by Mei Ruhan. He felt bitter in his mouth, but he couldn't help showing a trace of fear in his eyes. Young master is really terrible. In the quiet room on the 3rd floor, Su Li and Gong Min walked in and found that Gong Xiangjuan was staggering and trying to get out of bed. Gong Min was shocked and walked over to hold her grandma. Grandma, you just woke up and you are weak. Don't move. Gong Xiangjuan looked at Gong Min, who had lost a lot of weight. She couldn't help but say, Min, you have suffered with me. Grandma, Gong Min murmured. Tears welled up in her eyes and fell down. Gong Xiangjuan sighed and turned to Su Li standing aside. She was about to get out of bed and salute. Mr. Li, although I am in a coma, I know what happened these days. Mr. Li, thank you so much. Su Li quickly stopped Gong Xiangjuan and smiled warmly. Old Dean, you don't have to do this. I just help you as much as I can. You still need half a month to recuperate. You'd better not get out of bed. Well, I will listen to Mr. Li. Gong Xiangjuan lay on the bed and sighed slowly. I have long noticed Wu Yun's behavior. I didn't expect that I would be poisoned. Unfortunately, Min's mother was not as lucky as me. She met Mr. Li. Gong Min held Gong Xiangjuan's hand and shook her head. It's not your fault. Grandma, I am so happy that you can wake up. If even you. Gong Xiangjuan sighed and touched Gong Min's head. She looked up and said, Mr. Li, I think Min has told you about the Gong family. If I really have an accident, I hope Mr. Li can be kind enough to take me in. I can't go back to the Gong family. Gong Min immediately panicked when she heard Gong Xiangjuan's words. Old Dean, you don't have to do this. Su Li waved her hand and gave Gong Min a reassuring look. Your body is fine. As long as you recuperate, you can live for more than 10 years. Lin Xingrong, the master of the Lin family, was shocked by Lin Yinxing's first sentence. Then, the slightly fat master of the Lin family, who was in his 40s, pulled Lin Yinxing's arm and said in a low voice, Yinxing, you came just in time. I was just about to tell you that I, your father, have already returned all of Matchmaker's albums. Lin Yinxing was a little happy and said in surprise, Does it mean that you already know which miss I want? Lin Xingrong chuckled, stroked his beard and nodded. That lady is definitely worthy of you. Is she really Su Li? There was excitement in Lin Yinxing's eyes. He was afraid that his family would dislike Su Li's family background and obstruct him. He didn't expect that his father had arranged everything. Lin Xiang followed Lin Yinxing with a pale face and a flash of resentment in her eyes. If Su Li really lived on her head for the rest of her life, she would rather die directly. Lin Xingrong was stunned and looked strange. Yinxing, why do you think of her? The girl of the Su family is indeed talented, but she is just talented. It is hard to say whether she can go further in the future. You know her family background. How can she be worthy of our Lin family? I want to say that she is the daughter of the Jin family. The Jin family? That Jin Rulin? Lin Yinxing's face was slightly pale. He had been in the Qinghe town for so many years, and certainly had seen Jin Rulin. Thinking of her disgusting face, Lin Yinxing almost vomited and couldn't help but refute. Father, if I remember correctly, Jin Rulin was dropped out of the Qinghe school and expelled from the embroidery workshop. Her reputation is too bad. How can she be worthy of me? So, Su Li is worthy of you? Lin Xingrong pulled a long face and said, It seems that you are really fascinated by Su Li today. You are not calm. How can you take charge of our Lin family in the future? Let me slowly explain this matter to you. Then, Lin Xingrong glanced at Lin Xiang behind Lin Yinxing. Lin Xiang immediately understood and left, leaving only the father and son of the Lin family. Lin Yinxing glanced at Lin Xiang, who was well-behaved, and said coldly, Father, just say it. If you ask me to marry Jin Rulin without a good reason, I will never agree. You. Lin Xingrong was so angry that he stared at his son. But when he thought of his son's brilliant achievements, he couldn't bear to scold him. Finally, he said in a low voice, It is the madam of the Gong family in Yunjing who introduced you. Do you know what it means? The Gong family in Yunjing? Lin Yinxing's face changed a little bit. Yes. Lin Xingrong waved his sleeves and said, Do you think your father is stupid? Marrying the Jin family at the cusp of the storm is undoubtedly going against the rules. But if there is a madam of the Gong family, it will be completely different. Chapter 112. Mr. Li finally sent you out to do something? After Fang Yuan left, Mei Ruhan stood up and leaned over. She wanted to see what was written on the note. Luo Yichen immediately put away the note and said seriously, Mr. Li said to keep it a secret. Don't peek at it. Without further ado, I will set off immediately. I see. Mei Ruhan heard what he said and nodded obediently. Go ahead. Be careful on the way. Luo Yichen left quietly, but he was slightly annoyed. The woman definitely did it on purpose. Fortunately, he reacted quickly. Otherwise, he didn't know what Ruhan would think of him. Suli naturally didn't know that she didn't mean to order and was misunderstood by Luo Yichen. She was still in the attic at the moment, holding the AO sword skills that she got from Jinchang AO. This sword skill was regarded as the peerless swordsmanship by people in the martial arts circle in the previous life. She naturally had to practice it, but she didn't practice from right to left like Jinchang AO. Instead, she practiced from left to right and started from the last level. In the previous life, she heard countless rumors about the AO sword skills. The secrets of it had long been thoroughly understood by people in the martial arts circle. For example, this sword skill was equivalent to a circle. There was no general outline and no words to mark the order of the realm. It seemed that it could be practiced from left to right, from right to left, or from the middle. In the previous life, this sword skill fell into the hands of the beggar from Jinchang AO. The beggar practiced it in a muddle. Coincidentally, he chose the completely opposite way of practicing with Jinchang AO. He accidentally played all kinds of magic of the AO sword skills and became famous as Sword Marquis in the later generations. In contrast, Jinchang AO was too unlucky. The wrong way of practicing led to defects in his state of mind. The deeper he practiced, the defects would be infinitely magnified. Eventually, he completely lost his humanity and died in madness. Suli just slightly advanced Jinchang AO's death and intercepted the opportunity of Sword Marquis in the previous life. So, the fate of the little beggar was unknown. Sisterly, are you there? When Suli was recalling, Fong Ling's clear voice suddenly came from outside the door. The rice wine brewed in the underground cellar is almost full. What should we do? Creak. As soon as Fong Ling finished her words, Suli, dressed as Mr. Li, walked out of the room. She said, Call Xuedong and Haydn. Let's go to the underground wine cellar together. Fong Ling's blinking eyes suddenly lit up, and she immediately turned around and went downstairs to gather people. Mei Ruhan heard the noise and poked her head out from behind the cabinet. She didn't know where Suli and others went. She couldn't help but be curious, but she didn't dare to follow them without Mr. Li's permission. Suli opened the secret door of the underground addendum and came to the underground wine cellar. She immediately smelled the strong aroma of wine. The wine cellar, with a radius of 60 square meters, was full of shelves. Jars of wine were neatly placed on the shelves. One more thing. Fong Ling counted her fingers and said worriedly, There are not many dried osmanthus in the warehouse. It can last for a month at most. If the new wine is not ready, we won't have anything to sell next month. Suli nodded slightly and said softly, Today is the 7th day of March. There are still more than 4 months before the osmanthus blossoms. Last year, we were short-handed, so it was normal that we didn't have enough osmanthus flowers. We have enough people this year. Remember to go to the osmanthus forest to collect enough osmanthus. Now, I will teach you how to make new wine with bronzeware. Everyone was shocked when they heard the words. They had released the news of strong wine for almost a month, but they didn't take it out for a long time. It caused the Linli building to be criticized recently. Some people even said that osmanthus wine was a flower wine that only effeminate men would drink. In Xuedong was very angry. She knew that it was the news released by other wineries. But Suli had too many things recently, which led to the postponement of the new wine. She could only helplessly watch many drinkers of the Linli building being taken away by other wineries. While thinking, In Xuedong had followed Suli to the huge bronzeware which was as high as a person. Usually, she was busy with the shopkeeper's affairs and didn't look at it carefully. Today, she could look at it carefully. This utensil was composed of 2 parts. There was a groove near the top and bottom of the utensil. At the bottom of the groove, there was a drainage pipe which was connected to another large wine jar. Boss, how to use this thing? Haydn was confused. Not only him, but In Xuedong and Fong Ling also touched this weird utensil for the first time. They didn't know how Suli would use it to make wine. Suli smiled slightly and waved to Haydn. You bring a few jars of wine and pour them into the utensil. In Su, come over and heat the utensil. Keep the fire big. The temperature in the room quickly rose, but it didn't exceed the tolerable limit. Insu wiped the hot sweat on his head. He turned his head and saw the dense vents on the wall. He admired Su Li more when he realized it. Master's wisdom is really unfathomable. I'm afraid that when designing this building, you have considered the ventilation problem. Otherwise, the temperature in the room will be much higher. Clatter. Haydn didn't let Inshuedong and Fong Ling do it. He took people to pour jars of turbid rice, wine into the utensil one after another. Soon there were a bunch of empty jars in the corner of the room. It's too early for her to make a choice now. Inshuedong was stunned and watched Su Li turn around and leave with the flagon. She didn't know what to feel for a while. Thank you for taking care of the Linli building. I see that your body and bones are weak. The Liehua wine is too strong, even if it's third class. I advise you to drink less. After that, Inshuedong turned around and left. Although she had diluted the raw pulp according to Su Li's instructions, she was still afraid of accidents, so she couldn't help but come to remind Su Li. Hearing the shopkeeper's concern, old Li's heart warmed. Soon after, his gaze fell onto the wine pot in front of him, and he lightly poured a cup. The clear and transparent amber-colored wine flowed into the cup, causing Old Li to be stunned. The Inferno wasn't an ordinary turbid wine. It was as clear and transparent as the osmanthus wine, and its color was much lighter than the osmanthus wine. He moved closer to smell it. The rich and mellow fragrance of the wine assailed his nostrils. It was the fragrance of the wine itself, not the fragrance of any flowers. Lao Li's eyes were shining, and he was excited to drink. The Linli building really didn't let him down. They really developed the pure wine that belonged to the Linli building. Gulp. Old Li raised his wine cup and drank it in one gulp. The spicy wine immediately poured down his throat, stimulating Old Li to the point he couldn't help but choke and cough. He didn't expect that merely the lowest grade of Liehua spirits would be so spicy and strong. After the stimulation, a warm feeling rose in Old Li's stomach, as if there was really a ball of fire burning in his abdomen. His limbs, which had been cold since he woke up, immediately warmed up, and even his back was slightly sweating. So it turns out that when the wine is strong, it can really drive away the coldness like raging fire. Liehua wine, wonderful, wonderful. Old Li drank by himself in high spirits. Soon, his face turned red and he was drunk. Just then, a middle-aged man walked into the shop. When the man saw Old Li, he immediately quickened his pace and sat to the side. Old Li, you are really drinking here. Of course, I will live in the Linli building for the rest of my life. What are you doing here? Seeing that Old Li was a little tongue-tied, his face was red, and his eyes were wandering. The middle-aged man didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said, "You are an old drunkard. How can you get drunk after drinking the light osmanthus wine? Don't you boast that you can drink 1,000 cups without getting drunk? Well, don't pretend. I just found a new winery. The wine there is much stronger than osmanthus wine. Hurry up and come with me." "No, I won't go." Old Li flicked his sleeves, and the middle-aged man looked a little embarrassed. He came to invite Old Li to drink good wine with good intentions, but Old Li didn't know what was good for him. At this time, Old Li picked up the flagon at hand and approached the middle-aged man. He smirked and said, "You, smell it." Chapter 114. For 3 days in a row, the transaction volume of the Linli building was high. In addition, Inshuedong introduced the strategy of limiting the purchase, so those businessmen who wanted to buy low and sell high could not make profits. The Liehua spirits were too good and cheap. Even if it was a third-class spirit, Its value was far more than one tael of silver. The ordinary wineries in the Qinghe town were not competitive at all. In just 3 days, their profits shrank by more than half. If it went on like this, they would not be far from bankruptcy. The winery owners were all panicked. When they thought of what they had done before, they were more afraid. The Linli building is simply ruthless. It's too vicious. If I had known it, I wouldn't have spread rumors everywhere. Now, if they really develop the spirits, how could we survive? Why don't you think about the consequences of what you have done? Now we are in trouble with you. How will you compensate us? Ho ho, you know to speak at this time? You didn't stop us when we did it before. Seeing that a group of winery owners were about to fight, the old man sitting in the middle finally couldn't help but hit the table and said angrily, "Shut up." In an instant, the voice in the room was quiet. The old man obviously had a high reputation in this group. He glanced at the people present with his eyes full of vicissitudes and said, "Everyone, the business world is like a battlefield. The winner takes all, and the loser takes all." Speaking of this, the old man sighed and said, "Mo Hungong is inferior to the Linli building in the winemaking skill. The Qinghe winery is not as good as the Linli building. There is nothing to talk about. I don't want to talk about the dirty things you have done before. The Linli building is annoyed by you and deliberately lowers the price so that you have no business to do. In my opinion, it is reasonable. But if it goes on like this, it will affect the prosperity of the winemaking industry in the Qinghe town. So, I propose to reconcile with Mr. Li through Satrap Yin. What do you think?" Mo Hungong's words were reasonable and made everyone silent. They also knew that they were wrong. But if they apologized to a young woman who was more than 10 years younger than them, wasn't it too difficult? Mo Hungong was not in a hurry. He sat there with his eyes closed, waiting for everyone's response. After an unknown period of time, a dejected owner finally stood up and sighed. "I agree with Venerable Mo's proposal. This winery is my life. If it's gone, my family will have nothing to eat. A mistake is a mistake. There's nothing to be ashamed of." Someone took the lead to admit defeat. Immediately, an acquaintance nodded and said, "I also agree. I was wrong this time. I should give Mr. Li an explanation." "Not bad. Me too. I don't agree. What right does a silly little girl have to make me apologize?" After a heated discussion, Mo Hungong took 90% of the people to the county governor's mansion, leaving only a few particularly vile wineries still stubbornly resisting. They knew what they had done, and even if they went to the county governor for help, they would not necessarily be forgiven. In that case, why would they go and humiliate themselves? County Governor Yin was under great pressure from the Jean family and the Lin family. He was surprised when a group of winery owners suddenly came to him. "Yes, how could I forget that I can also ask Mr. Li for help?" Yin Shixuan was delighted. Many industries of the Yin family were under vicious competition, so he had to do business at a loss. He had lost hundreds of thousands of taels these days, and the liquidity was about to run out. "Venerable Amo, I will negotiate with Mr. Li on this matter. However, I think that if you want to show your sincerity, it's better to let the winery owners jointly write a letter of apology and post it on the bulletin board to restore the credibility of the Linli building. In this way, the Linli building will definitely let bygones be bygones and will not be ruthless." As soon as he said that, the faces of the winery owners who followed him changed. Mo Hungong's expression did not change. He nodded naturally and said, "It should be so. I also have the same idea. Mr. Li is a divine doctor and kind-hearted. This time, he must be angry. If there is a letter of apology, it is enough to appease Mr. Li's anger." Hearing that, Yin Shixuan laughed loudly and said, "Venerable Amo, you are really well informed." Then he turned his eyes to a group of winery owners. His face suddenly became cold and he said, "Mr. Li once saved my son's life. To be honest, if you used violent means, I would have already taken action. It can be regarded as a favor to Mr. Li. Now, you are not even willing to write a letter of apology? Do you really want to taste the feeling of being in prison?" Hearing that, the winery owners all turned pale and said that they dared not. They couldn't get in touch with people like Satrap Yin. How could they know that Mr. Li had other identities? If they had known that the satrap's mansion was behind the Leanly building, they would not have dared to offend the Leanly building. Lord, we have written a letter of apology. Please calm down. Lord, please calm down. By the way, the Qingzhou Winery and the Wincy Winery are not here. They are the culprits who spread the rumors. Seeing that the winery owners changed their minds instantly, Yin Shishuan sneered in his heart. But he still looked calm and said lightly, "You just do your own things. Don't get involved in the affairs of the two wineries." Under the instruction of Mo Hongong, a group of winery owners tremblingly wrote a letter of apology and posted it on the most conspicuous place on the bulletin board. Soon, it attracted the attention of the people in the city. For a time, it was talked about with relish. Moreover, it's a force with great financial resources. If it's really only the Jin clan and the Lin clan, they'll destroy themselves before the Yin clan falls. It doesn't make sense at all. Su Li thought and suddenly said, "Satrap Yin, have you heard of the name Wu Yun?" Yin Shishuan was shocked and said, "Of course I have. What do you mean?" "Nothing. I just asked casually." Su Li seemed to ask casually and immediately changed the topic. "Satrap Yin, how much are you going to borrow today?" Yin Shishuan secretly remembered the name Wu Yun. Then, he raised his head and said earnestly, "The more, the better. I don't believe that the help of the people behind the Jin family and the Lin family is infinite. As long as I can hold on, the final victory will be mine. Here, I also promise you that I will share the fruits of victory with you and will never embezzle them." Su Li smiled and said, "Since Satrap Yin said so, I have no reason not to help you. It is enough for the Leanly building to open a winery. It doesn't need too many industries, but I will have more and more people in the future. The place of the Leanly building is a little small. If Satrap Yin can allocate the residents of the Jin family to the Leanly building, I will be very grateful." Yin Shishuan's pupils shrank slightly. Why did he feel that Ms. Li was determined to get the residents of the Jin family? Did she also want to intervene in this matter? However, no matter what the meaning of the words was, as long as the Yin family could win, everything else was not a problem. "Ms. Li, you are really serious. If I can really stand in the end, the residents of the Jin family will be yours to live." In the room, there was a cheerful laughter of an old man and a young man. After 5 minutes, Yin Shishuan took a heavy bag of banknotes and left the Leanly building in horror. A total of 1 million circulating taels. Is it the profit of the Leanly building in the past 6 months, or the foundation of the Leanly building? He used to be a person in the martial arts circle. The more he thought about Su Li, the more frightened he was. He was so scared that he didn't dare to think about it. At night, in the martial arts field of the school, Yin Hongxiu stroked the silver longbow with joy on her face. Recently, she seemed to be able to feel the emotion of the silver bow. It seemed that the silver bow was no longer a dead thing, but a living person who could communicate with her. "Can you finally communicate with the spiritual bow preliminarily?" A strange voice suddenly came from behind. Yin Hongxiu immediately turned around and said with surprise, "Immortal Master, you are here." Su Li nodded gently and said, "Now try to pull the bow." Yin Hongxiu immediately stood up straight and pulled the bowstring according to her words. She immediately pulled the bowstring a little bit. Although the extent was not obvious, Yin Hongxiu was ecstatic. She couldn't pull the bowstring at all before. It seemed that the bowstring of the silver bow was simply made of stone and had no elasticity at all. "Very good." Su Li praised her generously. "You have been preliminarily recognized by the spiritual bow. Next, let your father buy more blood-enriching herbs and put them at home." Yin Hongxiu was stunned and looked confused. What did the blood-enriching herbs have to do with her archery practice? "Next, you need to smear the spiritual bow with your own blood every day. You can't rest for a day. I will teach you a pithy formula. When you smear the blood, you can't stop it. Do you understand?" Yin Hongxiu trembled when she heard it. What was this strange method? She should use her blood to control the longbow. The method of blood refining? You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.